Right, you better make yourself comfortable because this is going to take some explaining. It's going to be quite an obscure topic for most people, so this video is not really for everyone. It's going to look at the wrapping of repeating textures around a cube and sort of the drawbacks and solutions to object cubic mapping mode. So if we look at this cube here, in fact all the materials of the selected objects, they're all mapped object cubic. This is a mesh object that I've included so you can see what's going on when you start wrapping around a more complicated shape that's basically cubic but not quite. And okay, so this is a simple repeating pattern. We've got this arrow and these are just two-dimensional faces and that's mapped onto there. Here's a little cross that I've started folding into the shape of a cube to help explain some things, and here's the cube itself and, as I say, the mesh object there. Now this pattern with the arrows on is there to demonstrate this pattern repeats happily horizontally and vertically, but when it comes to wrapping it around a cube we run into a bit of a problem. Now you could imagine you'd be okay if these arrows went around in a circle, the front of the arrow pointing at the back, but this arrow on top, there's no position it can be in where it'll conform to all the arrows around it. Like here we see the arrows follow along, but this one here, although it follows vertically, this selection hits the side of this arrow. So this shows that this pattern's not entirely compatible with wrapping around a cube. I mean, it may look so at this point because the yellow area is uniform, so you're not really having any conflict at these corners. But things change when it comes to moving if you offset the arrow. So if we go into the materials, I've saved a selection. So this, although it may not look it, is exactly the same arrow, but instead of it being in the middle of the face, it's offset, so the arrow's now at the corner. And then when we map this, we've got the arrow pattern following along here on the 2D faces, but things go a bit wonky when it comes to this corner here with the transition. Likewise on this corner here things don't look right because there's a conflict. The arrows are okay for 2D mapping but not for around a cube. And another issue you have, if I just go back to my other ones because that was easier to visualize, right? So as I was saying with these, this would be okay if the arrows continued around in a circle. That wouldn't really be a problem. But if we move the camera across and look at the other side of the cube, then you can see the arrows are conflicting here, so these two are pointing together. And the reason for that is in the object cubic mapping mode, it's as if the arrow continues all the way through the face, much like a stick of rock. So you might have noticed in the wireframe I've had this cylinder hidden at the back here, and the reason for that is that this is my simulated stick of rock. So if you've all seen the video how they make rock and how it starts off as a really big thing and they roll it down, then you'll have seen them put the words in, right? And here at the moment these words are not very legible because they're backwards. But if we went to the other end of the stick of rock, thanks to the object cubic mapping mode, except in this case I've just used an end mapping, so we didn't get the patterns around the sides because that'd make things complicated. You can still, you know, get the idea is that it's travelled all the way through. So one side is quite legible and the other side is a mirror image because these letters continue all the way through, sort of parallel to the surface. So if I was to expand that, if I can organise this correctly and change it, and move if I can get the expansion right. Oh, it's going to be a bit fiddly this. I should have thought this through, shouldn't I? It's going to be less. I'll use, if you hold Shift key down, you can do it by narrower divisions. There you go. That's quite a useful thing to know. And just check out of there. You can see now, as if we were seeing through slices, the letters are continuing parallel to the end. So this is why we can't get these arrows to continue all the way round. And although things look okay at the moment because the yellow is quite uniform, if you start having information along the edge of this cube, then things go a bit wrong. But some patterns will map. So let's have a look at a pattern that maps quite easily. So I'll select all the families, select the material, and we'll get this pattern where all the arrows point inwards, and at that point we won't have any rotational problems. So here it's all looking good, everything's uniform. The pattern works in 2D and it works in 3D and it works around the cube. So if we now move across to the other side and have a look at this, the other side of the cube, even though this is a mirror of the other side, the pattern still lines up, because whichever way you flip it, horizontally or vertically, the pattern still behaves itself. So there's no trouble there with a pattern like that. But there are other patterns that sort of occupy a halfway between working and not working, depending on the way that the sides are rotated. So we're going to move now to the next case, which you might have glimpsed here, which is a rotational pattern. Now this rotational pattern is sort of the main focus of the problem I've got here. As you can see, things are looking pretty good so far. They'll fit and follow quite nicely in this corner, and it's looking good here. But as you might have anticipated, if you think about what's going on in this cube, right, I'll focus on the cube. This arrow is pointing towards us, essentially, and this arrow is pointing away. But if you were to follow this pattern all the way through, like the stick of rock, on this side it'll be pointing towards us. So these arrows, like the other arrows did, are going to conflict on this side of the cube and here. So what we need here is to have it turned round so that we don't have this conflict, and likewise on the other side. So although initially it might look like this pattern's going to map easily onto a cube, it's not going to map on this with the object cubic mapping mode. So it is a shame, because it would make life easier, but then again, you know, when has life been particularly easy with mapping modes? Now, this is the little setup that I've created to explain folding the cube. So you can see as far as two-dimensionally this pattern's following fine. Now, because I've arranged this, you can also see, if you imagine this side was folded down with this one, this arrow would meet up with this one, which would follow round to this one, which would follow round there. And if we could fold this up just on its own from these 2D faces, we could make the pattern follow the cube. So that's what I'm just going to go to do here. So I'm just going to get rid of well, everything in the scene essentially. So I'll just select all, because it'll just be inconvenient to have any of these things left. Right, and I'm going to create just a 2D face. So this 2D face is going to have our material on it. I just set that up, picture. Okay, it's not selected the right one. This one is the one I want to do. Give it some ambient so we can see it. So that's our 2D face, and what I'm going to do is build a cube from this so that this pattern wraps all the way around the cube. So I'll copy and paste the 2D face and I'll rotate it. Then I can hold Shift key down. Should allow it to step along consistently in discrete steps in certain directions, which will allow me to build my cube exactly correctly. Although I'm going to probably have to rotate some of the faces by the time I've done. So if I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. It's just a bit fiddly because I want this to be exactly a cube shape. So I've got, no, it's not showing very much in that view. Right, I've got two faces for my cube here, and you can see that at this point they wouldn't follow correctly, because that arrow points up across the top and then would conflict with this arrow. So if I flip this face over just by rotating it there, then that will follow round correctly now, and this arrow is pointing round that way, so they're cycling in that direction. That's good. So I'll group these two, copy and paste, and then if I if I rotate the group over, then I've got the arrows following correctly, and then I need to get it to rotate round towards me to finish the cube off. So again, copy and paste and rotate it round towards me, and that should fill in the front face of the cube. Now if I explore around this cube that I've made, you can see, hopefully, that that's given me a nice, albeit a bit boring, repeating pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm going to group all these together and just position the camera so I can see what I'm looking at, and then I'm going to save this, and then we're going to explore a more interesting pattern to demonstrate why you would want to set this up in this way. So I'll just save this file. So after a bit of pondering, then we've reached this stage where we've got this rotated pattern mapped around this cube made up of 2D faces, and it's all working fine, but obviously this is quite a basic shape. If we look, if you recall, this mesh object that I'd included in the scene, which is there to demonstrate the flaws in object cubic, even though we're looking at the best corner, the one where the arrows are following each other around, things break down on these other corners because of the stick of rock issue of the arrows going through and then conflicting. We've still got breaks in the pattern because it's not exactly a cube shape. Where these corners are chipped away, there's bits of the pattern missing, and you get into the straight bit and the arrow bit meeting rather suddenly at the sharp edge. So even on the best corner, it's not going to work for that. So what I'm going to have to do is call upon a product that Horo and I made, and it can be found here in brycetutorials.info under Bryce Downloads, under my name at the very end of the list at the moment until something else gets added, or maybe they added from the top, I don't know. Anyway, there it is, Bryce 7 Pro Spherical Mapper, and at the moment this is what the product page looks like. And what it does is it allows you to convert an entire Bryce scene into a spherical map. And the entire Bryce scene I want to convert is the inside of this pattern, so I can then use it to remap it onto other objects without having these problems. So I'm going to get rid of this for the time being and consider this cube. Now if I get hold of this cube and I'm going to place it where I can find it, so that's going to be at the world center, so I get hold of it as a single object, that's it, and place it at the world center. So the center of that cube is now the center of the world. For a spherical map to work correctly in Bryce, because it can be remapped using the spherical mapping mode, the aspect ratio of your document needs to be 2:1. Go into the document setup here and set the document to an aspect ratio of 2:1, and I'm going to make it just a convenient size, 1024 by 512, so that gives me my 2:1 document aspect ratio. Now if I find my camera in this scene, what I want to do is place that at the world center without any rotation at all. So just set all these values to 0. You don't need to worry about the field of view. So that's now placed the camera inside the box. I'm going to get hold of the box and make it a bit bigger. And also, because I'm going to be using the spherical mapper, I'm inside the cube, I don't want any interference because I just want a flat pattern from the sky settings. So I'll turn the atmosphere off. Can't see through the box, but I'm setting that to black anyway. I don't want any sky dome colour, so that's set to black. I'm going to use just ambient to light the inside of the pattern, so I'm going to turn the sun off, so that's not a light source in this scene, and I'm going to set the ambient up to full brightness. You saw in the preview there that made the pattern fully bright, because in the material settings we've got a full ambient channel there. We don't need diffuse, it's not doing anything, it's just the ambient that's lighting the inside of this box. This is just so I can capture the pattern. And the last thing I'm going to need, but the essential component, is the spherical mapping lens system to fit onto the camera, and it's captured in panoramic 360-degree projection mode. So I switch it to panoramic projection, which gives us, I think, a cylindrical projection, but we need a spherical projection to be able to remap this texture effectively. So I've saved this Spherical Mapper in here. There it is, and I need to alter its position so it's directly in alignment with the camera's origin. So that's at the centre of the camera now. So if we switch to the main view, everything should be set up now from the perspective camera through the Spherical Mapper onto the projected background in a 2:1 aspect ratio. This will now give me my spherically mapped pattern, provided I've got all things lined up correctly. There's a slight line there because I think one of the cube faces wasn't perfectly aligned. I could correct that by selecting all the faces, and if I increase the size fractionally, so I'm being a bit perfectionist about this now, then that'll probably get rid of any of those lines. So that is now the spherical map of my pattern from the inside of that cube. So I'll save as that, and that's saved my pattern now. And then I can go back to my cube here and spawn the object that I was mostly interested in wrapping this pattern around. And you can see where we've got these issues with the pattern. Now if we go into the material, go into the library and load in this spherical map like so, and then change the mapping mode to spherical, and then come out again, you should find that happily there's no longer this issue with the arrows. And likewise, we can a simple transformation will be onto a cube, because then we can do a comparison between these two objects, bearing in mind this is one object, a cube, and this is 6 objects, the 6 faces, and obviously is what it's best suited to is a sphere. So there you go, that's the next stage, being able to convert this from one mapping mode to another. And so now we've got it mapped onto a sphere. Obviously when it came from a cube to a sphere, even though these are correct in themselves, there's still the issue of the fact you've gone from a cube to a sphere, so you will get some changes in angle, but at least the pattern continues. With a simple pattern you might see that happening, but now the final stage is we're going to use this same approach to capture a more complex pattern. The pattern I've chosen is this one. It came from Genetica 3.6 Pro, and it's sort of an Escher repeating pattern with these lizards, and it's rotated as the arrows were, which means that you can't use Object Cubic to map it onto a cube and have it follow all the way around the cube. You have a problem. In fact, well, I can just demonstrate that quite easily. What I'll do, I'll get rid of these 2 objects there, and I'll create a cube, and I'll just bring in this pattern from there, and we'll set it to Object Cubic and have a look at how that looks, because I think this is on its best corner again. So all the 3 lizards' heads meet comfortably in the corner, but if I rotate it round, remembering the stick of rock and the problems you have there, here there's a bit of a conflict. We've got a little head there that's not really connected to a body, and this one's got 2 bodies. Well, it's just not right, is it? So this, we can provide the same solution that we did with the simpler pattern. So we just go back into the scene which we've already set up, select all the different faces simultaneously. So we've got selected all the cube faces, and then we can bring in our pattern, and that will allow us, using the mapper, to create our map. And you can see here, these are the corners of the cube faces, and the heads are all meeting correctly, and the pattern's unbroken. This distortion at the poles is the same sort of effect you have when looking at projections of the Earth when they're laid out flat in this kind of format, the North Pole and Antarctica seem much larger than they really are. I mean, I know they're huge, but compared with the other continents on this side, so like this lizard's head here, because it's moving towards the pole, looks massive, but the mapping mode corrects for that, so we'll save that. So we've got that, and the other thing I'm going to do is likewise remap in that format the bump map that I created for this as well. So that's so we can have a multi-channel solution. So that's just rendering the bump map for that, and save as. So that gives me another spherical map to use in my scene. So what am I going to do with these? Well, I'll go back to this one where I've just got this box because it's just empty really. Under the default Bryce sky, I'll create a ground plane. I'll bring in some objects, so I'll bring in this mesh object that I'm using, and I'm going to duplicate that because it's already got our pattern on of the arrows into just 3 separate objects. I'm going to convert this one into a sphere. I'll convert this one into a cube. I don't know what I'm going to convert this one into. So there's a cylinder, and then if we just select all these objects together, so I've got them in the blue family, go to the material lab, and I'm going to change this to the spherical map here, and I'm going to load in its bump pattern there. So we just need to change that to spherical. I can now give it some bump from the bump pattern, perhaps some specularity, anisotropy, just to make things look a bit more interesting. Give it 15 reflection. I could take the specular colour from the colour of the map there, reduce the ambience. We'll see how that looks now. So now we've got this pattern over all these objects, and well, I'm going to load in a bit some more interesting lighting, so we'll make a final image of this. So I use HDRI image. I'm going to use one of Horo's, this Trap and Haul 2, and increase the intensity of that to 20. Let's have a look in the scene here. It's not lighting it very much. The sunlight's automatically disabled when you load a HDR. I'll reduce the quality there and increase the intensity of the light. Let's see, get some light in this scene. Try 200. Here we go. It's quite strongly coloured, so I'll reduce the saturation to 50%. So how does that look? Okay, I'm going to use the premium effect rendering mode, true ambience, and linked with HDRI, the true ambience optimization in the from the HDRI provides quite nice lighting. So I'll set that down to set the effect up. TA scattering correction, I'll leave the maximum ray depth at 6 for now. So we'll see how that renders. Quite colourfully, but obviously it's going to take some time. I'll reduce the document setup there to a bit smaller size, and I can zoom in on my objects. So there's going to be the feature of this scene. I'm going to restore the sunlight, so to provide some key light, but this might go too bright now, so I might just set the sun down slightly or move it around. I just want some shadow regions there off to one side. I'll lower the camera a bit, and then this is like a still life setup. I could add some more effects. This is just a final demonstration image, which I want to actually look decent. So I'll use some of these render options. I'll set the depth of field, which is just select the object that you want, go to the perspective projection, set to current selection. That will set me this object as in focus. So these things going out of focus in the background, perhaps a bit too much. So back into render options, and I'll use a narrower lens radius If you want to know more about depth of field, there's a tutorial specific to that, as well as the lighting options that I'm using as well. But I'll just show you going through the motions. If you're familiar with this, then it should make sense to you. Set the shadow softness for the sunlight that I'm using, and also, since I was using anisotropic effect, in true ambience specularity doesn't get generated from the HDRI, and the HDRI doesn't generate very much anyway, so another reason for turning the sun on would be to get the specular to respond to that effect. So now we've got the specular highlight responding to that. This is, it's gone out of focus there, so it's quite a... I might have moved the camera. Or it could just be the fact that it's focused on the middle of that object. So if I pull the camera back slightly, so I know it's focused on the middle, I should be able to bring this into sharper focus there. And another point would be, since I've turned soft shadows on and we're using premium effects, they won't take effect until they're enabled in the premium effects. So that now that's going to be the scene I've set up to go with this video. That's all. So I'll just reposition the things in the view, and then I'll set from my render options raise per pixel 256, and that'll help reduce the noise in the true ambience render. But as you can see, it slows it down tremendously. So the solution there, it says it's going to take 20 minutes. Well, that seems like a little bit long-winded, so I'll see if I can get away with half the maximum ray depth, and that'll probably improve the render time, or to half the render time. So I'll just stop the video at this point, and I'll resume when it's done. There then is the final render, and for those of you who haven't run into this particular mapping mode problem, then you probably think that, you know, that was a really long-winded way to go around getting what seems to be quite a simple effect. And for those of you who have, I hope you appreciate why I made this video, and that you found it, well, that you all found it interesting and easy to follow, though there's no guarantee of that. The subject is a little bit obscure, and that you found it enjoyable. So there you go. How to go about wrapping a rotated repeating pattern around a cube, around a sphere, around a mesh object, or indeed anything on which you can use the spherical mapping mode. Finally then, here is what the render would have looked like if I'd have remembered, as I should have done, to use the bump map that I'd prepared and actually put it in the channel here, so it was actually controlling the bump channel, and then re-rendered it. I've re-rendered it at a slightly larger resolution, just so you can see the full effect of the bump channel on the render, and it gives it that slightly embossed appearance because it's affecting the specular channel as well. So I just wanted to include that, since I'd slipped up there and forgot to add in the control.